Hello, and welcome back to Book and Page. We are on Chapter 4 of The Place of the Lion, The Two Camps. So let's get right into our brief summary of what happened in the scene. Not much, it's a whole lot of talking, but man, are there some revelations. And then we'll talk about those in a little more depth. So, like I said, a lot of talking in this scene. We join Anthony and Quentin in their home, where it turns out Quentin is still deeply affected by the whole lion-lioness thing that happened on Tuesday night. Probably this is the reason why Anthony doesn't seem to have mentioned the whole butterfly thing that just happened that day. Instead, they talk about the lion-lioness, and Quentin seems to be trying to convince both himself and, well, mostly himself through Anthony, that he had to have only seen the lioness. But Anthony fully admits that, no, he's pretty sure they saw a lion, but that's also not possible. So it must have just been a lioness. They seem to be moving away from this conversation. They're about to smoke some cigars when the doorbell rings, and who comes in but Mr. Foster, the gentleman who was at the house gathering when the supposed snake appeared. Anthony invites Mr. Foster in, and it turns out he's been talking with a lot of people. He's been talking with Damaris, he's also been talking with Mr. Ty, and this is how we find out Mr. Ty has not only gone to contemplate in front of his butterfly collections, but seems now to be praying to them because this great butterfly has convinced him butterflies exist. Yep. Mr. Foster then goes on to offer his explanation of what seems to be happening here. The forms, the quintessential beings, we call them many things. He does actually also include archangels and angels here, so we do have the religious side along with the secular side, but basically these great existing ideas that we call stupid names like wisdom and justice exist within a second world, and every now and then they sort of touch our world and create things within it. And we seem to have had this moment now where they're coming fully into our world, they're absorbing everything into themselves, which is why the singular butterfly absorbed the multitudes of butterflies, and then existing in our world. This is harrowing the end times, as all of these forms come through, subsume everything, destroy anything that is not subsumed, and, well, there doesn't seem to be a lot of speculation about what happens after this. Anthony and Quentin are both put off with this idea. Quentin because he's absolutely terrified of it, and Anthony because, well, he's not quite sure this information and hypothesis is correct. Nor does he necessarily take it at face value that there is nothing humanity can do about this. This is kind of true for everything that Anthony has shown us so far about himself. He really does see the power of humanity here, and he's kind of like, I gotta at least try to take on the forms. Even though Mr. Foster says that the only people who are going to be subsumed into these beings are those who honestly believe in them, like Mr. Behringer was. Everybody else, those who are afraid of them and those who oppose them, this includes Anthony, Quentin on the afraid side, and Damaris will be absolutely destroyed. Again, Anthony's just kind of like, well, we're gonna have to try and fight them if they do exist. Thank you, Mr. Foster, for bringing this to my attention. Have a good night. And they part on relatively poor terms, though Anthony does say that he's gotta try and figure out what's happening and make it stop, because he's promised Damaris to help her get her degree, and the end of the world is going to prevent that. So yet again, for Anthony, it all comes back to a girl that they don't have a super healthy relationship together. But okay. So this is actually the chapter where you get the synopsis of the book that you tend to give other people. this argument that the forms have come into the world is precisely the argument being made by the book. It's not a hypothesis that it turns out it's wrong, it's completely something else. There are wizards at Hogwarts that are just summoning things because they've gone nuts. Like, that's not what's happening. Mr. Foster here is correct in his hypothesis that the ideas, the great ideas of the world, have entered into ours. The problem is that there are certain things in this argument where you're just kind of like, I don't think you and I are thinking about this the same way. Which is to say, his tendency, just like Damaris, for him saying, a lot of people in this novel think they have a full understanding of some things. And they're all wrong. Like, this is why, if you think there is an objective truth, and that you have it, you're going to run into a lot of problems. Because Mr. Foster, again, thinks he has understood the objective truth of everything. With what's happening right now, he is closer than a lot of people, but if there is an objective truth, again, you only have a subjective perspective on it. And what happens here is Mr. Foster is actually making an assumption that Damaris made as well, which is considering, let's say, the Platonic forms to be the same thing as angels and archangels, which is exactly what Damaris's paper was about, right? Let's see if I can find what he calls them. So, yeah, okay. So, he calls them great certain principles. There, I found it, okay. So he's explaining Mr. Behringer's beliefs and what he believes as well. We call them by cold names, wisdom and courage and beauty and strength and so on. But actually they are very great and mighty powers. It may be that they are the angels and archangels of which the Christianity Church talks, and Miss Damaris Ty, I do not know. So we are again having this thought that they could be the same thing. And I think that's a little dangerous, because I guarantee, oh god, there are going to be a lot of people who aren't seeing the same thing. And all you have to look at is the fact that the Christian virtues, okay, so we'll go with powers on that one, the Christian powers, and this is capitalized in the book here, and the Greek powers, there are some that connect together. There are certainly ones that don't. Humility, very important power within the Christian church. Not so much in the Greek understanding of things, in which there is something like great-souledness, where you know what you're worth, and you expect people to treat you with the respect that you deserve. Very different ideas that are happening here, but it's the fact, the very hard fact, that we're never going to get a full understanding of what is in fact happening from these characters, precisely because humanity's understanding, knowledge, and language is inaccurate in many ways. Coconuts are furry and produce milk. Does that mean they're a mammal? Right? Categorization, very inaccurate. Can be misleading. So it's this idea that we're trying to describe something that is wholly beyond our comprehension. And in that way, it suddenly does make sense to have these two groups being combined with each other. These powers, where we're calling them very cold names: wisdom, courage, beauty, strength. And each of those, even if you have the term, the definition is always going to be a little screwy. Like, try and describe to somebody the definition of beauty. And watch the argument start. Especially if it's between academics. And that is kind of what's happening here. We have different types of academics who have different understandings of these things. Go into the Bible and read the description of especially any type of angel. It's absolutely horrifying and not very clear what they are. Like, there's a reason why when angels appear, one of the first things they have to say is "do not fear." Because these are terrifying beings beyond our comprehension. And authors run into this constantly. I think one of the most interesting ones I had, which I find deeply connected here, even if it hasn't been directly referenced at this point, is Dante's Divine Comedy. In the third part, the Paradiso, he's out in heaven and he attempts to explain what God may look like, and you just see a complete and total breakdown in descriptions. So it goes both ways. Something utterly glorious and something utterly terrifying defy description. And so is the combining of these two things very strange? No. But the book, in a lot of ways, and the characters, certainly within the book, are trying to set up a dichotomy. Because the chapter name of this one is called The Two Camps. Now, the two camps have been brought up before, and we've had Damaris and Anthony placed in opposite camps. We're redefining what the two camps are now, based on the big thing that has just happened, which is these forms beginning to show up in the world. And suddenly the two camps appear to be those who believe in the forms and wish to be subsumed and become one. They're not afraid of them, they're not resisting them, they accept what is happening, and those who don't accept it. And suddenly Anthony and Damaris are actually in the same camp, for maybe different reasons, as is Quentin, who is in there for very different reasons, which he's utterly terrified by all of these things. But of course, you would be. Like, Quentin's response here is understandable. And again, Mr. Foster, well, he's picking and choosing who he respects here. Because he's made some of the same decisions Damaris has, though he seems to respect her less and less. And outright, he just stops talking to Quentin partway through this conversation. By the end of it, he says nothing to the man. But in the previous chapter, when we do have, again, well, actually in the second chapter, so the previous two chapters, we do have somebody else who falls into hysterics in seeing one of these forms, and Mr. Foster doesn't seem to be upset. In fact, he is the most attentive to this person and the most believing of her. But the coming of the snake and the coming of the lion both induce hysterics within people who witness it. Why do we get to choose one versus the other? So what we have, legitimately, is a false dichotomy here, precisely because, well, are there actually two camps? I don't think so, because the people at the meeting, well, they were followers of Mr. Behringer. They were very interested in the forms. But there were some that still doubted. I should have her name. Miss Wilmot, as she started perceiving the snake. And again, utter hysterics when they all hear the hiss and go bolting out of the room. So, is that group in Mr. Foster's camp, or are they with Anthony and Damaris? Guaranteed neither Anthony nor Damaris would say that those people were in their camp. This dichotomy, this binary, just doesn't exist. Especially if we do take Mr. Foster's explanation that these are the forms, the powers, the archangels, whatever you want to call them, coming into existence. The possibility of the two camps could be a little different. It could be that the forms have the most power, or that humanity has the most power. But again, I think this is a false dichotomy. If we watch very closely, well, it's the coming together of the true groups that seems to mean the most. For example, Mr. Foster seems to admit to this. And then that which is behind them intends to put a new soul into matter. It deposes them as it will, and by a particular mingling of them, a child is born, and this is their concern with us. But what is their concern in business among themselves, we cannot know. So, we are, again, a creation of some sort of these powers. And not just of these powers. Again, Mr. Foster is referencing here something even bigger and more powerful beyond the forms. The first mover, if you will, if you don't want to use a religious term here, the first mover, or the prime mover, is the idea that if you go back and back and back for what causes things, even scientifically, you're eventually going to hit a point where some sort of event had to have first happened. And the question is, was there an intelligence or power behind that first event that ends up creating everything else? Is there a God who creates the forms, or the angels, or whatever you call them, and then eventually uses those to create us? Again, science does that too. Humanity is not a unique thing. We are made out of matter, and the same type of matter that makes up the rest of the universe. You can get to very macro levels and very micro levels. I got those two mixed up. You can get to very macro levels and very micro levels in this understanding. But it's still all the same matter. Here, we're being told it's all the same principles, just mingled together. And so, when the principles come in, they almost subtract what they've provided and draw it all in. So we do have a disappearing lioness, because the form of the lion has appeared. So two camps, like I said, could be the powers have all the power, or humanity has some sort of power here. And again, that's a false dichotomy, because Mr. Foster, who self-identifies himself to be all for the powers, we're all gonna get subsumed, the earth is gonna end, whoop-de-dingle-doo, that's the way of the world, gives humanity power here. It's quite insane, of course, but if it were true, why a lioness into a lion? Right? A lioness was there, it disappeared, a lion appeared. Because the temporal and spatial thing may be masculine or feminine, but the immortal being must in itself appear as masculine to us if masculinity is constant with its nature. Human traits be input on the forms. All I'm saying. Okay. And again, this is true for a lot of thought about these things, which is to say that masculine and feminine in themselves are indisputable existing principles. and that all other principles find their natures to be connected to one or the other. Thanks, I hate it. Because this is, again, a culturally relevant thing. If you look at other cultures that are not the dominant Western culture, and I say dominant here, the idea of there being solely two genders that everything else is defined by is considered moronic. There are beliefs to be third genders. People who have no genders. And I'm saying dominant Western culture here, and you're going to say, well, that's got a big history, it goes all the way back to the Greeks. No, it doesn't. Because there is, in fact, a Greek story about somebody who is a third gender. They are hermaphrodite. They're called hermaphrodite, but they don't have the specific genitalia of a woman or a man. It is somebody that is in between. They are somebody that is in between. And so, the modern concept of these indisputable identities controlling then the entire world, again, is just like, no? Like, Mr. Foster, for him saying he has the objective truth, is viewing the world through the concept of human-made ideas that he's then saying are not human-made. But that's the hard thing about talking about things like this, right? Because most of us would probably say concepts like wisdom and justice and beauty are also human-made. Is there a concept of justice within the animal world? Is there a concept of beauty or wisdom? Is there an understanding of two genders and their connection then to all these other principles? I would say no, because the alignment of what humanity has put on the feminine side versus the masculine side does not, in fact, always line up with nature in general. Quick example, seahorses. The male seahorse is the one who becomes pregnant and has children, raises children. Anglerfish. I mean, the male bites the female and just kind of exists like that afterwards. Like, there are creatures that don't have sexual reproduction, such as worms. They produce asexually. So the gender conformity idea, especially as we have had it presented to us as part of human nature, is a deeply flawed one. So to suddenly turn around and say, yes, the lion appeared because, well, what does he suggest it could have been? Strength or authority or something like that is masculine in nature. Okay, no, I think that might just be your bias on that one. So again, we seem to still be having this human perspective breaking in here. Because again, if Mr. Foster is not even sure what form has appeared in the form of a lion, because that's the other thing we've been told here, the lion that appears is not the perfect form of all lions. It is in reference to some sort of intelligible idea that's coming through. Well, he's not sure if it's strength or authority or something like that. A lot of people might have said courage, right? Because lions and courage, thanks Harry Potter, bravery. And so suddenly, you're kind of like, do you know at all what's going on? Because you can't tell me what form has appeared, but you could tell me for sure that it's appeared as a lion, because whatever form it is, it's a masculine trait. Cool, so what about the butterfly? Is the butterfly masculine or feminine? What about the snake? Is the snake masculine or feminine? And again, why a crowned snake? Because surely that's a human invention. You don't see snakes out and about with crowns, unless, of course, they're referring to the actual curve, like the hood of the snake. Which maybe they are, but the crowned snake is certainly drawing a different image in our heads. Especially then we combine it with Aaron's rod, which is the story of... I know Aaron's the brother of Moses, but I swear it's still Moses that takes the rod, but it might have been Aaron's rod in the first place. Moses takes it from him. But Moses has come to the Pharaoh, let my people go, and the Pharaoh's court magicians summon snakes from rods. And Moses says, "A-okay," and he takes Aaron's rod and he throws it upon the ground, and it becomes a bigger snake that ultimately eats the two false snakes. And this is a sign that God is on the side of Moses. So, again, we're trying to understand the great big things through human stories, and acting like we have a full understanding when we don't even have the words to describe what is happening. And so we're told, this is the dichotomy. Which side are you on? No, I'm pretty sure a lot of what's happening we don't understand, and it's going to take me much longer to decide if I'm in a camp and if there are even two camps to begin with. Until that point, Mr. Foster just, again, like a lot of the other characters, is secure in his own knowledge, and ultimately, I think an event like this should make you doubt the world a lot more than it convinces you you understand everything. Mr. Tai, I'm more willing to forgive, because he very specifically comes to say that seeing the form of the butterfly proved to him that butterflies exist. So he's looking at a very, again, micro thing having occurred. Everybody else is trying to look at the macro picture, and I'm just like, I just think that's beyond our comprehension right now, dudes. But we're gonna see. We're gonna see how Williams handles this. Because like I said, we are dealing with images that even as an author, he's going to struggle to put into words, simply because they're concepts that we don't have the words for. So, I mean, it's going to be a wild ride. Pick your camp, pick no camp, pick all the camps. I don't even know. I'm going to keep reading, and I hope you do too. See you next time.